Every Olympics has at least one shockingly close finish. The best athletes in the world push their bodies to the brink, so it makes sense. But how close can the events really be? To figure that out, we're counting down the top 10 insanely close finishes in Olympics history. Starting with number 10, Lance Larson versus John Devitt, 1960. The near-dead heat finish between United States' Lance Larson and Australia's John Devitt was so controversial that they contested it for 4 years. In the 1960 Olympics, Larson and Devitt swam against each other in the 100-meter freestyle swimming event. After a really tough battle, their race to the finish ended in a near-dead heat, meaning that they finished neck and neck with no obvious winner. Devitt was pretty disappointed that there wasn't a clear-cut winner, but congratulated Larson and left the pool. There was a lot of confusion, though, since the judges couldn't decide who really won. 3 judges were asked to figure out who won first place, and another 3 judges decided who won second. But 3 of them thought Larson had won first place, and 3 thought Devitt had won first place. But when they consulted the electronic timers, they saw that Larson finished at 55.1 and Devitt at 55.2. Even the unofficial timer gave the win to Larson by 4 inches. That makes it obvious who won, but here's the kicker. The chief judge, Hans Runstromer, who didn't have any say in the matter according to the rules, ordered the rest to change Larson's time to 55.2, and then gave the win to Devitt. Larson protested the decision for 4 years, but to no avail. Sad. At number 9, Gary Illman versus Hans Joachim Klein, 1964. If you're thinking of Hans, the left-wing militant, it's not him. Weird how they both have the same exact name, though. Now, this event also turned out to be slightly controversial, except it was for bronze, not gold. Gary Illman of the U.S. and Klein from Germany swam to the finish around the same time. At least, that's what it looked like to the judges. They were split as to who came third, especially after consulting the electronic timers provided by the Japanese. And here's where they found themselves in a bit of a pickle. Both Illman and Klein were clocked in at 54 seconds, down to the hundredths of a second. But Klein ultimately won bronze because he'd come in 1/1000th of a second quicker than Illman. That's insane! For number 8, it's Mario Zanin's spectacular win in 1964. While Illman and Klein's minor bronze controversy was also in 1964, Mario Zanin's cycling win is what people remember from the Summer Olympics that year. The cycling road race was held over 120 miles, and it was a standard affair until the last 20 meters. Zanin was neck and neck with Kjell Rodin and Walter Gottfried, but the mechanic from Italy gave it one last hurl and emerged victorious. He won by a literal wheel, beating Rodin by 0.2 of a second. For perspective, let us give you an idea of just how close the finish was. The difference between Zanin and Sweden's Sture Pettersson was just 16/100ths of a second, or 0.16, and yet Pettersson ended up in 52nd place. Shocking! Next is number 7, the 1976 Women's Pentathlon. Let's set the scene. 4 events have been finished, and only the 200-meter race remains. The top 8 competitors are separated by only 95 points, and all the leaders are matched against one another in a final heat. It was an intense moment for everyone, and when the dust settled 26 later, the results shocked everyone. It turned out that East Germany's Sigrun Siegel, the long jump world record holder, and Christine Laser, also from East Germany, finished with the same points. Berglind Pollock, on the other hand, was only 5 points behind them. Even though Laser and Siegel were tied, Siegel was ultimately awarded gold on the basis of having beaten Laser in 3 of the 5 events. And if Pollock had run just 0.06 of a second faster, she would have nabbed gold instead of bronze. Kudos to Siegel, though. She jumped from 7th place to 1st in one single event. Now for number 6, the Evers Swindell sisters' nail-biting win. The 2008 Beijing Olympics had some brilliant finishes, but few came close to the women's rowing double sculls event. Twin sisters Georgina and Caroline Evers Swindell rowed their way to victory, netting gold with a shockingly close finish. What's surprising is that they looked like they were about to lose from the moment the event started. At the 500 meters mark, they were in 4th place, but then they advanced, rowing to 2nd place by the 1,000-meter mark. The only time the pair were leading was at the very end, finishing the event with a 0.01 second victory, and that's the narrowest win in Olympic history in that event. Coming up is number 5, Greg Barton versus Grant Davies, 1988. The 1,000-meter kayak singles are some of the most impressive games you can witness at the Olympics. They require strength, speed, and a whole lot of endurance. In the 1988 Olympics, Greg Barton, a Michigan mechanical engineer, went up against Australia's Grant Davies in a heated battle to the finish line. And this is where it gets interesting, because it looked like they were in a dead heat. South Korean officials told Barton that he'd cross the finish first. But then the scoreboard flashed showing Davies as the clear winner. The Australian began celebrating his win, but Barton, being the humble guy he was, started prepping for the final of the 1,000-meter pairs. The International Canoe Federation wasn't sure about the decision, though. The jury examined the finish line photo, and a few minutes later, they announced that Barton had won by a whopping 0.005 seconds. That's 5 milliseconds. We don't know about you, but we'd never stop flexing our gold medal if the finish was that insanely close. For number 4, Matt Biondi versus Anthony Nesti, 1988. Biondi was a favorite in the 100-meter butterfly swimming event. Everyone thought he was a shoo-in to win, and as soon as the event started, he began leading the pack. 10 meters from the finish line, he was still ahead by 2 feet. But just as he neared the touchpad, he decided to kick in the last few feet instead of taking an extra stroke, costing him precious milliseconds he didn't have. Because of this grave miscalculation, Suriname's Anthony Nesti slipped by and won by less than an inch. After the race, Biondi was obviously disappointed and quipped that if his fingernails were just a bit longer, he might have touched the pad sooner. At number 3, we have the 1992 women's 100-meter final. One thing's for sure, the women's 100-meter final held in Barcelona in 1992 was the closest track race in the game's history. Gail Devers of the United States and Russia's Ina Prevalova were neck and neck throughout most of the race. It was an intense battle between the two, with Jamaica's Julu Cuthbert and Marilyn Ottey right on their heels. The finish was really close between the first 5 sprinters, making it impossible to tell who won. The slow-motion replay of the finish wasn't conclusive either, since it looked like every sprinter had crossed the line at the same time. Ultimately, the officials gave the gold medal to Devers. Ottey, on the other hand, ended up in 5th place, even though she was less than 1/10 of a second behind Devers. We'd lose our minds if that happened to us, but we're glad Ottey kept it cool. In 2nd place, it's Michael Phelps' incredible 2008 win against Milorad Capic. The 2008 Olympics held in Beijing made Michael Phelps a household name. The 100-meter butterfly was the only race in which Phelps didn't hold a world record. In the first round, Milorad Capic, competing for Serbia, set an Olympic record in the first round. In the final, he led the pack halfway through, with Phelps trailing in 7th. But in a jaw-dropping finish, Phelps pushed himself beyond anything he's ever done over the last 50 meters, making up the deficit of more than a half a second and touching the pad in what looked like a tie with Capic. The results were too close to call by the naked eye, but the touchpads knew that Phelps was victorious. Omega, the official timekeeper of the Olympics, quickly announced that he'd won by 4.7 millimeters. For context, that's about the width of a pencil. Finally, number 1, Gunnar Larsson and Tim McKee's 1972 heat. In 1972, Sweden's Gunnar Larsson broke the Olympic record for the men's swimming 400-meter individual medley event. But how close was the finish, you ask? He was tied with Tim McKee from the United States and ended the race in a spectacular finish that confused the judges for a second. The finish was so close that they were both credited with the Olympic record, but Larsson got the win by 0.02 of a second. No disrespect, but that's a much closer win than Phelps and Capic. And what's interesting is that the officials changed the rules after this race. Whenever 2 swimmers were tied for hundredths of a second, it'd be declared a dead heat. We'd call it awesome if they didn't change the rule back. So, which insanely close win did you find most impressive? Tell us down below. See you in the next one.